Null-coalescing operators in C#. Sounds super complicated, but what are they? Well, one of them looks like this, 2 question marks, and another one looks like this, 2 question marks followed by an equals. But what are these random characters you're typing, I hear you ask? Well, allow me to explain. Null-coalescing operators allow you to work with reference types, like this list here, for example, which could be null, but it might not be null. And also nullable value types, which could be null, or they might be something completely different. So let's take a look at an example here. So here I'm creating a list of strings here, and this is called shopping list, and this is going to contain all the items on my shopping list. So I'm going shopping. Next, I have this type here, which is an integer, and this is the cost of my shopping. Now I'm going to default this to null because I haven't been shopping yet. Now I may find the time to go shopping, but I may not find the time to go shopping. If I do go shopping, then the cost will represent the value of my shop. However, if I can't be bothered to go shopping, then it's going to retain the value of null because I haven't been shopping yet, therefore there's no cost for my shop. So later on in the application, whether I went shopping or whether I didn't go shopping, that doesn't really matter, but I want to output a message that says my shopping cost was then the value of the shop. So in a normal world with a simple data type like this, you'd perhaps initialize it to 0 and then, or it could have another value, for example. I run the program, it tells me the cost of my shop. However, if I create a nullable value type like this and initialize it to null, then I typically use the value property to access the value here. However, if this doesn't have a value, perhaps I didn't find time to go shopping, then if I run the program, I have an error here. So we've talked about this before. The nullable object must have a value. So you can see I'm accessing this value property, but I'm not actually checking to make sure it has a value. So what I typically do in this case is just have an if statement here and check the has value property of this nullable type right here. So now I'm saying if I have a value, then I want to output the value. So this looks like it should work now. So it looks like I have nothing, but it's not crashing at least. So it looks pretty good. But you can see every time I try to access this value, I'm having to do a condition here. I'm having to do an if statement and actually check that there's a value there before I can finally use it, whether I want to output it to the window, whether I want to pass the value to a method or a method of a class or somewhere else. So basically I have to check it before I actually use it. But what if I told you there's a way where I can kind of combine these two things into one? Now this is where I introduce one of the null-coalescing operators, which is the 2 question marks. So let's take a look on how I can simplify this here. So I'm going to remove the has value check there, and then I'm going to remove dot value here. Then I'm going to introduce one of the null-coalescing operators, which is 2 question marks. I'm just going to use 0 as an example here, and I'm going to put parentheses around the whole thing so it doesn't throw an error. So what do you think this is going to do now? Well, perhaps you don't know because I haven't explained it enough. So let's run the software and actually see what happens. So I run the software now. It says the shopping cost was 0. So you can see, well, the cost is null, but for whatever reason, it's outputting this 0 here. However, if I change the cost to 4567 and run the application, now it's actually outputting 4567. So what is going on here? Well, this null-coalescing operator basically says, if this is null, so there's no value, then evaluate whatever is on the right-hand side of these 2 question marks. However, if this has a value, so anything that's not null, for example, then evaluate this side of the question marks and ignore this side completely. Don't even evaluate this side. So this is how one of the null-coalescing operators works. And you can see we don't need that condition there. It's kind of wrapped up in a tidy little 2-character statement right here, which is 2 question marks. So let me illustrate that a little better just in case you didn't get it the first time. So let me create a method here, and I'm just going to call it getDefaultCost. So what this method is going to do, it's going to return a default value for the cost if no value is specified. So it's just going to return 0. And with this operator here, I'm just appending a string to the result of whatever this evaluates at. So it's either going to evaluate to the left side, which is cost, or the right side, which is 0. However, it doesn't just need to be a 0 or a simple variable. It could be the result of an entire method, for example. So now if this is null, which it is, it's going to evaluate whatever is on this side. So it could be a simple type, it could be a method. So you see there's lots of options here. It's called evaluating. So if I run the application now, it's outputting 0. And just to prove that it's actually running the method, let's run it again. So you can see the right side is being evaluated because the left side is null. That's the power of the 2 question marks here, otherwise known as a null-coalescing operator. So here is the syntax here. So the 2 question marks here, the usage is you have a nullable type, whether it's a nullable simple data type, or it could even be a list, for example, because reference types can be null, as you can see there. And then on the right hand side, we have something to evaluate if the nullable type, which is this on the left hand side, is null. So we've talked about all of this, but this is a nice visualization if you didn't get it the first time. So this is one of the null coalescing operators right here. So I want to introduce one more null coalescing operator now, and that looks something like this. It's 2 question marks followed by an equals sign. And it's quite similar to the last example, but it's to do with assignment as well. So what does all that mean? Well, let's take a look at this example here. I have a list of integers here, and this list will total all of these expenditures. So all of the bills I paid this month, all of the cost of the shopping I've done this month, and the whole entire cost of spending my money on useless things. So all of these will get added to these totals here as separate line items. It's a list. So I want to add each of these totals to this list. So we can do that quite easily. We can make use of the add method that adds this to the list. And then we can just put the totals here. But remember it's a nullable type, so we need to use the value here, which looks fine. But oh wait, no, now we have to check it has a value. We have to make use of this property. Oh yes, but that has to go in a condition here to make sure it has a value, for example. And then we can add the value in. So this should work. But remember when I said null coalescing operators are shortcuts for all of this. So we don't need all of this at all. But in cases like this, we can make use of the other null coalescing operator, which is the 2 question marks and the equals sign. So what does that do and how does that work? So let's say, for example, these are defined as null here. For whatever reason during our software, we're not really giving these any values. They remain null. Well, maybe one of them has a value, but for whatever reason, some of them can still be null when we come to adding these to the list. So we only want to add the values where they're not null, because we can't add null things to a list. Even if we try, it's not going to let us. So what I want to do is, if these have a value, like this for example, then I want to add it to the list. So this one has a value of 4567, so I want to add it. However, if they're null, then I want to add 0 instead, or some other default value. Basically, I don't want to add null because I can't. So there is a actually quick way of doing this. And what I can do is use this null coalescing operator followed by a 0. So let's reset that. And what that does, if this variable here is null, then it's going to assign 0 into this variable and then add that to the list. So if this is null, if the left hand side of this operator evaluates to null, which it does because it's null, then this variable will receive the value of whatever is on the right side. And remember, this could be a simple value. It could be a method that has a return. It can basically be any expression that can be evaluated. So let's just put 0 here. And what we can do this for all of these. So we want to add all our cost of the bills, for example, and we want to, of course, add the cost of spending our money on useless things. So now look what happens. If I run the program and add a breakpoint here, and now I go down to my totals here and expand that, you can see the list has all these zeros here, which is the default value, as you can see here. And not only that, you can see this reflected in the variables themselves. They now have the value of 0. And to illustrate that point, I'm just going to change 1 to something like this. I'm going to run the software one more time. And if I come to the locals window down here, you can see this variable has actually retained this value. It's been assigned into it. So it now has a new value, 4, 5, 6, 7. And this is now reflected in the list as well. So this null coalescing operator, 2 question marks and an equals, if the left side is null, then the left side will receive the value on the right hand side. And that is how this operator works. And just like before, I'll write a code comment so you can see this illustrated right here. If the nullable type evaluates to null, for example, cost of shopping is null and it's null at that point, then evaluate whatever's on the right hand side of this operator and assign it to the nullable type, obviously if the nullable type is null. So it receives the value. So those are 2 null coalescing operators in C#, how they work, and also why they're useful. It's nothing you cannot already do with a condition to check the value, but it is a nice shortcut to minimize code and also development time.